Modern warfare, it's not just about what you see in the sky, it's also about what's happening silently in the digital world. We're talking missiles and malware. And today, we're going to break down this really intense Israeli campaign against Iran that shows exactly how these two battlefields are now one and the same. All right, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First up, we'll look at the point of no return. What kicked this whole thing off? Then, Israel's opening move. After that, we'll get into the thick of it, a multi-front assault. And finally, we'll unpack the consequences, looking at Iran's weakened position and what this means for the entire world. So let's get right to it. What was the spark? What pushed this long simmering shadow war right out into the open? Well, it all boils down to one thing, really. A super high-stakes calculation about Iran's nuclear program. I mean, you can't get much clearer than this. An Israeli official basically laid it all out, saying if this ends with Fordo still functioning, we have not achieved our objectives. Wow. That one sentence tells you everything you need to know. The entire operation, all of it, was laser-focused on one place, Fordo. Okay, so what is Fordo exactly? Think of it as the crown jewel, or maybe the fortified heart of Iran's nuclear program. This thing is buried deep inside a mountain, literally built to be untouchable by conventional airstrikes. And that presents a huge problem, right? How do you take out something you can't even reach? Answering that question, well, that's the key to understanding Israel's entire game plan here. The clock was ticking. The immediate trigger for all this was a pretty terrifying warning from Israeli intelligence. They were looking at reports, and what they saw was Iran's uranium enrichment just accelerating like crazy. It was getting dangerously close to what they called the point of no return, that moment where they could build not just one, but multiple nuclear weapons. For Israel, that wasn't just a red line. It was a line that had just been smashed through.
All right, so the threat is clear. The line has been crossed. Israel decided it was time to act. Let's jump into the opening phase of the whole campaign.
And they didn't just go in guns blazing. This was surgical, almost like a chess game. The first moves, on June 12th, they weren't even aimed at the nuclear facilities. Nope. Israel went after Iran's ability to fight back. They dismantled air defenses, took out missile capabilities, and even disrupted their command structure. They were basically clearing the board, piece by piece, before Iran even had a chance to react. And their stated objectives were, well, they were blunt. Degrade, destroy, roll back the threat. There was no ambiguity here. These goals were the playbook for everything that came next. But here's where things get really fascinating. This wasn't just a typical air campaign. The assault was happening on two fronts at once. One you could see, and one you couldn't. So the physical attacks were just relentless. You had strikes hitting the core of the nuclear program at Natanz and Esfahan, a huge missile base. But it wasn't just about blowing up buildings. They also went after the brains behind the operation. We're talking about the reported assassinations of 5 senior nuclear scientists, and maybe even the commander of the elite Quds Force himself. They were targeting both the hardware and the software, if you will. And while all that was happening, while Iran was trying to figure out what just hit them, a second attack, a silent one, was already in motion. This time, the target was Iran's financial system. Hackers went after a major bank, Bank Sepah, and they completely drained the country's biggest crypto exchange. But here's the kicker, and this is so important. The timing wasn't a coincidence. These cyber attacks were launched at the exact same time as the airstrikes. The goal? To create maximum chaos, to paralyze the government while the physical attacks were happening. That, right there, is modern hybrid warfare. Missiles and malware perfectly synchronized. Okay, so you have this massive two-pronged attack. What was the result? How did this affect Iran's ability to even fight back? Well, Iran did retaliate about 18 hours later. But look at this number. Fewer than 100 ballistic missiles. Now, for a nation that always threatens this overwhelming, massive response, it's not very much. It's surprisingly weak, and that number tells you a lot. So what gives? Why so few? Well, most of the missiles they did launch were just shot out of the sky. A coordinated missile defense shield involving both Israel and the US took care of them. And this was a huge deal. It wasn't just a failed counterattack, it was a public embarrassment. It completely exposed the weaknesses in Iran's big deterrence strategy. And experts noticed. Nicholas Harris from the New Lies Institute put it perfectly. The whole thing showed that Israel has the qualitative military edge. See, the operation wasn't just about destroying stuff. It was about proving a point, and it revealed a massive tech gap between the two countries. But an event like this never happens in a vacuum, right? The shockwaves went far beyond the Middle East. So let's zoom out and look at the global fallout. Diplomatically, things got messy fast. On one side, you had the US saying, hey, this is a second chance for a nuclear deal, while also sending a warship to the area. On the other side, Iran was having none of it. They walked away from the negotiating table, pointed the finger at the US for giving Israel the green light, and then threatened to play their biggest trump card. And that trump card? It all comes down to this number, 21%. What is that? That is the percentage of the entire world's liquid petroleum that has to pass through one single narrow choke point, the Strait of Hormuz. So you can see the danger here. Iran threatens to shut down that strait. At the same time, Israel has already hit major energy sites inside Iran, like the huge South Pars gas field. You put those two things together, and suddenly the entire global economy is holding its breath. The possibility of a massive energy crisis just became very, very real. And all of this really brings us to a huge, kind of mind-bending question about warfare today. When a successful day means you've destroyed some nuclear centrifuges and you've hacked into a bunch of bank accounts, the whole idea of what it means to win gets really blurry. It really makes you wonder, in this new world of missiles and malware, what does victory even look like anymore?